Prince, the rebel royal who broke free from the chains of the monarchy, was now found lying on the cold floor of his Montecito mansion, his face bloodied, his trust shattered, and his marriage teetering on the edge of collapse. This is not a tabloid headline. This is the story insiders are whispering about, the story leaked reports hint at, the story that could shake not just Hollywood but Buckingham Palace itself. Prince Harry rushed to the hospital after a private fight with Meghan Markle allegedly turned physical. And the most haunting question lingers in the air. Was this a one-time eruption of rage, or the climax of something far darker that's been brewing all along? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. For years, the narrative was clear. Meghan Markle, the glamorous actress who captivated the world, and Prince Harry, the royal renegade who chose love over duty, sold us their happily ever after. The world tuned in to watch their royal wedding. Millions believed in their modern fairy tale, and countless headlines framed them as victims of a cruel institution that didn't understand them. But what happens when the escape from the monarchy becomes its own cage? When the Hollywood dream mansion becomes the scene of something more sinister? Tonight, we pull back the curtain, piece together the fragments, and expose the contradictions that the world has ignored for too long. Imagine the scene. It's late evening. The house is quiet, save for the muffled arguments that echo through the grand Montecito halls. The neighbors don't hear a thing. Thick walls and sprawling grounds keep everything contained. But inside, tension is mounting. Words are exchanged, sharp as daggers. Accusations fly. Old wounds resurface. Money, image, loyalty, the crown, Diana's memory, Harry's resentment. And then, something happens. Something insiders claim turned heated words into violence. Moments later, Harry is injured, struggling, and staff are scrambling to contain the chaos. Within hours, he's in a hospital bed, his face bearing injuries that no royal spokesperson can spin away. And yet, when cameras later capture Meghan smiling, posing, acting as if nothing happened, the contradiction is almost too much to comprehend. How can the mask be so convincing when the truth is allegedly so brutal? You see, the story matters now more than ever because it cuts to the heart of everything the world thought it knew about the Sussexes. They've branded themselves as victims of the press, victims of the monarchy, champions of compassion and mental health. And yet, behind closed doors, could Meghan, the woman who once claimed she saved Harry, be the very one destroying him? That's the gut punch that makes this story impossible to ignore. Because it's not just about a fight. It's about betrayal, broken trust, and the unraveling of a union that once promised hope but now reeks of tragedy. And here's the twist most people don't see coming. This isn't just Meghan versus Harry. This is Meghan versus the royal family, Meghan versus the media, Meghan versus the world that once adored her. Every detail that leaks, every whisper from insiders, every hospital report carries the potential to ignite a firestorm that could burn bridges permanently. And Harry, caught in the middle, faces the ultimate contradiction. He fought so hard to escape the control of the palace, only to allegedly find himself controlled in ways far more painful. He wanted freedom. But what price is he paying for it now? Ask yourself, why would hospital staff risk their jobs by leaking details? Why would insiders close to the couple suddenly break their silence? Is it concern for Harry? Is it disgust at the cover-up? Or is it simply that the truth has grown too heavy to hide? Every leak suggests there's more. More than the public has seen, more than the Sussexes want revealed, more than their Netflix cameras could ever capture. And it's that hunger for truth, that gnawing sense that something catastrophic is happening behind the walls of their California home, that pulls us deeper into this story. Because here's the contradiction that cannot be ignored. Meghan has built her brand on being a survivor, a voice for women, a figure of compassion. Yet, if these reports are true, if she really attacked Harry during that confrontation, then the narrative collapses under its own weight. How can someone so vocal about kindness, mental health, and empowerment also be accused of turning violent against the very man she vowed to love and protect? The hypocrisy alone is staggering. And yet, isn't it precisely that kind of contradiction that keeps people glued to this story? The saintly image versus the alleged sinner behind the scenes. Now, let's not forget Harry himself. The man who served in Afghanistan, who spoke bravely about trauma, who walked behind his mother's coffin at age 12 in front of the entire world, reduced to this moment of humiliation and pain. Can you imagine the psychological impact? To have the world idolize you as strong, resilient, unbreakable, while behind closed doors you're at your most vulnerable, hurt by the very person you thought was your safe harbor. That's not just physical injury. That's emotional devastation. That's a betrayal so deep it changes everything. The timing couldn't be worse either. With their Hollywood empire already wobbling, failed Spotify deals, struggling Netflix projects, a declining public image, this scandal doesn't just hit home. It threatens their survival as a brand. And Meghan knows it. That's why the smiling photos, the carefully staged appearances, the endless PR spin. But here's the question. Can a smile really hide the blood that insiders claim was spilled? Can a press release erase the scars of a violent night? Or is the truth stronger than the image? You decide. Because here's where it gets darker. Some say this was not the first time Meghan's temper has exploded. Staffers once complained of bullying. Palace aides whispered about meltdowns. Insiders describe her rage as volcanic, unpredictable, impossible to control. If those stories were dismissed before as exaggerations, doesn't this alleged incident cast them in a terrifying new light? What if the palace warnings were true all along? What if Harry ignored the red flags, and now he's paying the ultimate price? And don't think for a second that the royal family isn't watching this unfold with a mixture of horror and vindication. Imagine William hearing that his brother, the man who walked away from the firm, is now facing this kind of humiliation. Imagine Charles realizing that the son he tried to protect is now allegedly wounded at the hands of his own wife. The irony is almost Shakespearean. A family torn apart, a monarchy bruised, and yet, it's the outsiders, not the crown, who seem most destructive of all. So, why does this matter to you, the viewer? Because it reveals something bigger than celebrity gossip. It exposes the danger of image over reality, of believing the fairy tale without questioning the cracks beneath it. It challenges everything we think we know about love, power, and betrayal. And it forces us to confront the possibility that maybe, just maybe, the greatest threat to Harry was never the institution he escaped, but the partner he chose. And here's where we leave this introduction with a chilling thought. If Harry truly was attacked, if he truly ended up in the hospital with serious injuries, what comes next? Does he stay silent? Does he protect Meghan at the cost of his own dignity? Or does this become the breaking point that changes everything? The marriage, the brand, the dynasty? Because one thing is certain. This story is far from over. The real revelations haven't even begun. And what comes next will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about the Sussexes. What if the words that night were sharper than any blade? Words so venomous they cut deeper than any wound to the skin. We ended with a chilling thought. Harry allegedly rushed to the hospital, his marriage hanging in the balance, and a world unaware of the storm brewing behind palace walls. But to understand how it came to that breaking point, we need to rewind, back to the calm before the chaos, to the fragile moments when everything seemed controlled until it wasn't. Every fight has a spark. But what was it that set off Meghan and Harry that night? Was it something trivial, like a disagreement over schedules or money? Or was it something heavier, resentment, betrayal, old wounds that had been festering for years? Picture it. The Montecito mansion lit softly by evening lamps, the sound of cutlery clinking faintly in the dining room, the children supposedly asleep upstairs. On the surface, it's calm, peaceful, but underneath, the tension is unbearable. Harry had been unusually quiet all day. His friends say silence is his defense mechanism, a way to avoid exploding. But silence, in a house built on unresolved issues, can feel like a provocation. Meghan, sharp-eyed and impatient, sensed it immediately. Why aren't you talking? Why are you sulking again? Those questions, simple on the surface, carried years of resentment behind them. Harry had been carrying the weight of lost family ties, broken friendships, and a crumbling reputation. And Meghan, desperate to maintain the facade of control, wasn't about to let him retreat into silence. Here's where it gets complicated. For Harry, silence was survival. For Meghan, silence was rebellion. Two different coping mechanisms colliding like tectonic plates. And when tectonic plates clash, earthquakes happen. Think about this. How many couples do you know who fought not over one big issue, but over the pile-up of 1,000 small ones. The missed dinners, the misunderstood words, the old grievances never resolved. That's what this moment was. 1,000 cuts exploding into one wound. Harry, tired and heavy with regret, muttered something under his breath. Insiders claim Meghan seized on it immediately, twisting it into a full-blown accusation. "So, you're blaming me again? Everything is always my fault, isn't it, Harry?" The irony? Meghan, who fought so hard to escape the palace's narrative of blame, now allegedly accused Harry of doing the exact same thing. Contradiction piled on contradiction. Harry raised his head, his face weary. And here's the part that hits hardest. He allegedly mentioned Diana. He said something about how his mother wouldn't have wanted this. That one sentence was the lit match to the powder keg. Because for Meghan, Diana had always been both a symbol and a shadow, a figure she invoked in interviews, comparing her own struggles to Harry's late mother. But for Harry, Diana was sacred ground. Bringing her into the fight was like opening an old wound and pouring salt directly inside. Pause for a moment. Can you imagine that? You're already at your breaking point, and then the one person who should protect your most painful memory throws it back at you in the heat of an argument. It's the kind of moment you don't come back from easily. Insiders claim Meghan's voice rose. The calm was gone. Now it was sharp, cutting, relentless. "You're weak, Harry. You've always been weak. Without me, you'd be nothing but a spare, rotting in your brother's shadow." And there it was. The insult that stabbed where it hurt most. The word spare. The title Harry had tried to shed by leaving the monarchy. The word that haunted him since childhood. The very label that drove him to carve out a new life. To hear it from Meghan, not the press, not his father, not his brother, but Meghan, that broke something inside him. Ask yourself, how do you react when the person you love most uses your deepest wound against you? Do you fight back? Do you crumble? Or do you snap? Harry snapped. His voice, usually calm and reserved, erupted. He shouted, accusing Meghan of caring more about her image than their marriage, of using him as a pawn in her Hollywood game. "You don't love me. You love what I give you," he allegedly cried. That line hung in the air like a knife. And Meghan, instead of de-escalating, allegedly doubled down. Neighbors later reported they thought they heard glass breaking that night. Some dismissed it as construction or wind. But insiders say it was a wine glass, slammed against the wall, shattering the last remnants of calm in that house. The fight had escalated from words to symbols of violence. And once a glass is broken, you can't put it back together. The irony was palpable. Harry, who once told the world he found freedom in Meghan, now found himself trapped in her rage. Meghan, who painted herself as the woman silenced by the crown, was now allegedly the one shouting the loudest, drowning out Harry's voice in his own home. Contradictions everywhere. Here's something you need to hold on to. This wasn't a sudden fight out of nowhere. This was years in the making. Every Netflix criticism, every failed business deal, every headline mocking them as grifters or hypocrites, every strained call with William or Charles. It all funneled into this one night, this one moment when the pressure cooker finally exploded. And once it exploded, there was no turning back. Harry tried to leave the room, insiders say. He wanted to escape, walk away, cool off. But Meghan allegedly blocked him, her anger boiling over. Imagine the scene. Harry's heart pounding, his head spinning. The realization that the woman he once thought was his salvation now looked like his tormentor. And this, my friends, is where the line between emotional and physical blurred. Reports suggest Meghan didn't just stop at words that night. She allegedly crossed into territory no couple should ever see. The confrontation escalated beyond shouting, beyond insults, into something far more dangerous. Harry's face would bear the consequences. But what exactly happened in those next seconds? That's the chilling question no one dares to answer fully. The leaks hint at it. The hospital records suggest it. The insiders whisper about it. And yet, the official silence screams louder than any statement could. What we know is this. By the time staff entered the room, Harry was no longer just emotionally wounded. He was physically hurt. And the man once considered unbreakable, military veteran, royal rebel, global icon, was now broken in a way the world had never seen. But how bad was it really? What injuries did he suffer? What did the hospital find? And most importantly, What did Meghan do in those terrifying moments right after the damage was done? What happens in that split second when anger stops being words and becomes action? When the line is crossed and there's no going back. We left off with Harry, face injured, staff rushing in, and silence screaming louder than any excuse could. But now, it's time to peel back the layers of that moment. To confront the question people are terrified to ask. What exactly happened in those seconds when Meghan allegedly snapped? The human body has a way of remembering impact. A bruise is more than just a mark, it's a story written on the skin. And insiders claim that Harry's face bore a story no palace aide or Hollywood PR team wanted told. He wasn't just shaken. He wasn't just hurt emotionally. He was injured. And the question that haunts this entire saga is simple. How did Meghan's rage allegedly turn into that outcome? Picture the scene. Harry, his jaw clenched, trying to move past Meghan. Her blocking him, the air charged with fury. A moment of defiance. A push. A strike. Some claim it was a slap. Others whisper it was more brutal. A fist, an object hurled across the room. What's consistent in every version is this. Harry didn't just walk away that night. He fell. He hit the ground. And for a split second, the prince who once walked through war zones and survived the relentless pressure of royal life lay on the cold floor of his California mansion, wounded not by an enemy, but by his wife. Think about the irony of that. Harry, who faced Taliban gunfire in Afghanistan, who risked his life flying helicopters in combat zones, now brought down in his own home. What does that say about the fragility of the human heart? About the betrayals that cut deeper than bullets? About the enemies who don't always wear uniforms? The silence after the strike was deafening. The kind of silence that makes time feel suspended. Meghan allegedly froze, realizing what she'd done. Insiders suggest there was shock in her eyes, but not the kind of shock that brings instant remorse. More the kind of shock that wonders, how much of this can be hidden? How quickly can this be spun? Because let's not forget, this isn't just a marriage. This is a brand. A billion-dollar brand built on victimhood, compassion, healing, and hope. And in that instant, the brand was under threat. Every smile on Oprah, every tear in the Netflix docuseries, every speech about mental health, it all cracked under the weight of this single act. Ask yourself, how would you react if the life you carefully built, the image you polished for the world, could collapse in seconds because of a moment you couldn't control? Would you apologize? Would you comfort? Or would you scramble to cover it up? What insiders allege is chilling. Meghan didn't rush to Harry's side. She didn't cry out in horror. She didn't even call for help immediately. Instead, she paused, calculating, measuring the fallout. Because the fallout was inevitable. The question was how much of it could be contained. But Harry was hurt. Not just emotionally, physically. The staff who eventually came running saw it with their own eyes. Blood. Bruising. A man dazed, possibly concussed. And here's where it gets even darker. Some claim Meghan told them to say it was an accident. That Harry slipped. That maybe he'd had too much to drink. That anything, would be better than admitting what really happened. Contradictions piled up quickly. If Harry slipped, why was the wine glass shattered against the wall? If Harry tripped, why were there defensive marks? Why did staff look so uneasy when asked about the incident later? These aren't just details. They're fractures in the cover story. And then comes the haunting question. What did Harry do in that moment? Did he defend himself? Did he lash out in return? Or did he, as insiders claim, simply sit in stunned silence, holding his face, realizing that the woman he had given up a kingdom for had just allegedly betrayed him in the most personal way possible? Imagine the pain of that realization. You leave your family, your home, your royal title behind, believing you're choosing love. And then that love strikes you down, literally. The betrayal isn't just physical. It's spiritual. It's emotional. It's the kind of betrayal that makes you question everything. Every decision, every sacrifice, every vow. Harry's bodyguard, they say, was the first to intervene. A call was made. Medical attention was needed. And here's where the story takes on an even more surreal twist. Because Meghan, instead of collapsing under guilt, allegedly snapped back into performance mode. She insisted she go with Harry, that she control the narrative from the hospital, that no story leak without her approval. But here's the contradiction the world can't ignore. If nothing happened, why the rush to control the story? If it was all just an accident, why the whispered instructions to staff to keep quiet? And if Meghan truly loved Harry, why wasn't her first instinct to comfort him instead of contain the fallout? The drive to the hospital, insiders say, was tense and silent. Harry slumped, injured, Meghan staring out the window. And in that silence, an entire maw. How do you rebuild trust when the foundation has been shattered by violence? The hospital staff, professionals but human, noticed immediately. Harry wasn't just tired or stressed. He was hurt. His injuries weren't consistent with just slipping. And here's where the whispers began. Medical charts were drawn up, reports logged. And yet, somehow, none of it ever made it into the official record the public was allowed to see. Convenient, isn't it? Ask yourself, who has the power to bury a hospital report? Who benefits most from keeping Harry's injuries quiet? And who risks everything by letting the truth out? The contradictions are staggering. On one hand, Meghan claims to fight for truth and transparency. On the other, the story of that night was locked away, hidden behind NDAs and whispered threats. And yet, truth has a way of escaping. One nurse confided to a friend. One aide hinted to a journalist. One insider couldn't live with the silence anymore. Piece by piece, the puzzle came together. Until finally, we get here, where whispers have become leaks, and leaks have become headlines too big to ignore. But this isn't just about Harry being hurt. This is about what it reveals. The cracks in the marriage. The hypocrisy in the brand. The dangerous edge of rage when it turns physical. And perhaps most hauntingly, it raises the question of whether this was truly the first time, or just the first time the world found out. Because that's the cliffhanger nobody wants to touch. If Meghan allegedly crossed the line once, what are the chances it happened before? What are the chances it could happen again? And if so, how much longer can Harry survive in silence before the truth swallows them both? What does it look like when a prince, once shielded by the crown, finds himself lying on the floor of his own home, hurt not by an enemy, but by the person he trusted most? That is the image that haunted staff that night. Harry on the floor, injured, dazed, struggling to breathe through the shock. This was not just another marital spat. This was a moment where everything shifted, where words became wounds, and where the truth could no longer be hidden behind royal etiquette or Hollywood gloss. The silence in that room wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of silence that screams, the kind that fills every corner with dread. Staff stood frozen. Meghan, insiders claim, stared down at Harry, her face a mix of rage, fear, and calculation. And Harry? He wasn't just hurt. He was broken in a way the world had never seen before. Think about this. Harry, the soldier who walked through Afghan battlefields, who faced the cameras after Diana's death with the weight of the world on his shoulders, was now crumpled in a corner of his own house. His uniform had been replaced with casual clothes, his battlefield replaced with the walls of Montecito, and his enemy wasn't a foreign power, it was his wife. How do you even begin to process that? One aide later described it as surreal. Another said it was like watching history repeat itself, as though Harry was doomed to replay cycles of trauma and betrayal, but this time, not at the hands of an institution, but inside his marriage. And that's the part that twists the knife deeper. Harry had always believed he escaped the cruelty of the palace. He thought Meghan was his sanctuary. Yet, insiders claim that sanctuary turned into the very thing he feared most. But let's pause and ask a simple question. What did Meghan do next? Did she rush to comfort him, apologize, hold him, and beg for forgiveness? No. According to whispers, she didn't. She allegedly stood there, trembling but rigid, her mind not on Harry's pain but on the implications. How much could this damage their image? What would happen if word got out? What if this leaked to the press, to the palace, to the very world that already doubted them? And here's the contradiction that can't be ignored. Meghan, who had always painted herself as the silenced one, allegedly silenced the man bleeding in front of her. Reports suggest she told him to get up, to stop making it worse, that she urged staff to keep their mouths shut. To anyone listening, the instructions were clear: damage control, not compassion. Imagine being a bodyguard in that moment. You're trained to protect your principal, to shield them from harm. And now, you're staring at the very person who caused the harm. Do you intervene? Do you speak up? Or do you risk your career by telling the truth? The staff's loyalty was fractured that night. Some chose silence. Some chose whispers. And those whispers are the reason we even know this story now. Harry tried to sit up. His hand went to his face, touching the swelling, the sting, the blood. Insiders say his eyes looked vacant, as if he wasn't just in pain, but in disbelief. This wasn't Afghanistan. This wasn't a tabloid headline. This was his life, his reality. And the cruel irony is that the cameras that once followed his every move were nowhere to be found. For once, Harry wasn't in the public eye. He was utterly alone, except for the very people he thought he could rely on. Let's be honest here. Pain isn't always just physical. The bruises heal. The cuts close. But the betrayal? That lingers. That carves itself into memory. And Harry's mind, already scarred from losing his mother, from years of being the spare, from battles with the press, now had to carry this. His wife, his supposed partner, his alleged attacker. And think about the symbolism of it. Diana once called her marriage to Charles a bit crowded. Meghan had compared herself to Diana, painting her marriage as a love story against the odds. But now, that image shattered. The love story turned horror. The sanctuary turned battlefield. The fairy tale turned nightmare. One detail that insiders whisper about makes this even darker. Harry allegedly muttered Diana's name while he lay there. Can you imagine that? The child who walked behind her coffin, now whispering her name decades later in a moment of desperation. Was it a plea for strength, a cry for help, or a haunting realization that history had repeated itself in a way too cruel to bear? Meghan, they say, left the room briefly, pacing, grabbing her phone, debating who to call. Not a doctor, not a confidant, but a PR strategist. That's right. The first instinct, according to whispers, wasn't healing, but hiding. Staff were instructed to prepare a story. Harry tripped. He fell. He was clumsy. Anything but the truth. Anything but admitting what had actually happened. But Harry's injuries spoke louder than any cover-up. A split lip, bruising around the cheek. Perhaps even a mild concussion. These weren't the marks of someone who simply stumbled. They were the marks of force. And the staff knew it. They saw it. And some couldn't keep silent. That's why leaks exist. Because when the truth is too heavy, silence cracks under its weight. Now, let me ask you directly. If you were Harry, lying on that floor, would you still believe in the person standing over you? Would you still defend them to the world? Or would you finally accept that the love you thought was salvation had become your prison? The drive to the hospital is where this story takes its most human turn. Harry, slouched, trying to stay conscious. Meghan, quiet, avoiding his gaze. The staff in the front, whispering to one another, already planning how to spin it. The contradiction between Harry's physical vulnerability and Meghan's emotional detachment couldn't be starker. He was broken. She was calculating. He was bleeding. She was strategizing. And when they reached the hospital, the professionals couldn't be fooled. Doctors see stories written on bodies every day. They know the difference between an accident and an assault. They know when the bruises don't match the explanation. And whispers say those doctors did know. They just couldn't say it aloud. Not when NDAs loomed. Not when the Sussex machine spun its web of silence. But the truth has a way of leaking. And it did. Nurses spoke in hushed tones. One texted a friend. One aide let it slip to a journalist. And the story began to unravel, piece by piece. Until finally, the image of Harry on the floor, injured, humiliated, betrayed, became impossible to deny. Yet here's the haunting part. Even as Harry sat in that hospital bed, treated by professionals, his loyalty to Meghan allegedly remained. He refused to speak out. He covered. He denied. He played the part of protector. But what does that say about him? Is it love? Is it fear? Is it the weight of everything he's sacrificed, making him feel trapped in silence? Because the silence won't last forever. Not with leaks. Not with witnesses. Not with insiders ready to risk everything. The truth is circling. The walls are closing in. And Meghan knows it. That's why the smile she wears in public looks more forced than ever. That's why her appearances feel staged, her laughter hollow. Because behind every flashbulb is the ghost of that night. And behind every handshake is the memory of Harry on the floor. So what happens next? Does Harry finally break the silence? Does Meghan double down on control? Does the royal family intervene, quietly but decisively, to protect their son and brother from a cycle too dark to ignore? One thing is certain, the cracks are widening. And once the dam bursts, the flood will drown everything in its path. But what exactly did the hospital staff see that night? What details slipped past the spin machine? And why were those details too explosive to stay buried? What happens when the walls of a hospital, meant to keep secrets safe, begin to whisper instead? We ended with the haunting question. What exactly did the hospital staff see that night when Harry was rushed in with injuries no press release could explain? And more importantly, why were those details too explosive to stay hidden? Let's step into that sterile, fluorescent-lit corridor. Imagine it. The automatic doors sliding open. Security moving quickly, keeping curious eyes away. A prince entering not with dignity but with bruises, cuts, and silence heavier than his own footsteps. Meghan close behind, stiff, controlled, her eyes darting, not at Harry, but at everyone around them. Doctors, nurses, aides, witnesses, people who would know the truth, even if they never spoke it aloud. What do you think those professionals saw? They didn't see a clumsy accident. They didn't see a man who simply tripped on a carpet or bumped his head on a counter. They saw injuries consistent with impact. A split lip, a swollen cheek, defensive abrasions along the arm, as though he had tried to shield himself. The kind of signs that tell a silent story, even when the patient refuses to. And here's where it gets chilling. Harry allegedly refused to explain. When asked what happened, he muttered, "Just a fall." Meghan, insiders say, jumped in before he could elaborate. "He slipped," she allegedly told them, her voice firm, her eyes locking onto the nurse like a warning. "He's clumsy sometimes." But the professionals weren't fooled. They've heard it before. Too many times. They've seen patients silenced by fear, by shame, by loyalty twisted into chains. Ask yourself, have you ever heard of clumsy excuses? The story of falling downstairs, of bumping into furniture, of slipping in the shower? Doctors know those excuses all too well. They know the patterns. And that night, they recognized it in Harry. But Harry wasn't just any patient. This wasn't just any case. This was the Duke of Sussex, a man whose face was known across the world. And that meant every detail mattered. Every mark on his skin was potential headline material. Every whisper could spark an international scandal. And Meghan knew it. That's why, insiders claim, she pulled one of the senior staff aside, reminding them of confidentiality agreements, reminding them of who exactly they were treating. Yet even the strictest NDAs can't cage the truth forever. Nurses are human. Aides talk. And slowly, details slipped. One whispered to a friend, "It wasn't an accident." Another hinted to a journalist, "You wouldn't believe what his chart says." Piece by piece, the fortress of secrecy began to crack. But let's pause here. Think about the contradiction. Meghan had built an empire of words around herself. She told Oprah she lost her voice in the palace. She told the world she fought to be heard. And yet, here she was, allegedly silencing her own husband, controlling the narrative of his pain. Isn't that the cruelest irony of all? Harry sat there, head bowed, while doctors examined him. The swelling was obvious. The split lip needed attention. They ordered scans to check for concussion. The atmosphere was heavy, tense. Staff whispered in corners. Meghan kept her phone in her hand, tapping furiously. Who was she messaging? A lawyer? A publicist? A strategist? Certainly not family, because calling them would mean admitting what happened. And that was a risk she couldn't afford. But here's the twist. One junior nurse, overwhelmed by the surreal sight of Prince Harry sitting in her ward, confided later to a friend that she almost cried. Not because of his injuries, but because of the look in his eyes. "He looked defeated," she said, like someone who'd lost a war no one else even knew was being fought. And that's the haunting image we can't shake. Harry, the man who once defied the monarchy for love, now sitting in a hospital chair, treated for wounds allegedly inflicted by the woman he gave it all up for. Can you see the tragedy in that? The contradiction? The betrayal layered on top of sacrifice? Now here's where things take a dramatic turn. The hospital records. Every patient, no matter who they are, leaves a paper trail. And those records, though sealed, are whispered to include words like contusion, laceration, possible blunt force trauma. Words that do not align with "slipped on the stairs." And once those words existed in print, they became a ticking time bomb. Because all it would take is one leak, one brave insider, one envelope slid under a journalist's door, and the truth would explode. But Meghan, according to insiders, knew this. That's why she allegedly tried to intervene before the paperwork left the hospital. She demanded discretion. She reminded the staff of who Harry was. She may have even hinted at legal consequences. But threats can only silence people for so long, especially when the story gnaws at their conscience. So the leaks began. Slowly, subtly, a journalist in London gets a tip. Harry was treated for injuries that don't add up. A tabloid in the US receives an anonymous message. Look into Montecito, late-night hospital visit. And suddenly, whispers become headlines. Carefully worded, of course. No one dares state it outright. But the implications? They're explosive. Now let me ask you directly. If you were a doctor, and you saw a global figure like Harry walk in with injuries that screamed more than just a fall, would you stay silent? Could you? Or would you feel the world deserved to know? And this is where Meghan's control starts to crack. Because the truth isn't just about one night. It's about everything that came before it. The reports of staff complaints in Kensington Palace. The bullying allegations. The whispers of her temper. All dismissed. All brushed off as exaggerations or jealousy. But now they're re-examined in the shadow of Harry's hospital visit. Suddenly, the puzzle pieces begin to fit. One hospital worker put it bluntly. If this ever comes out, it won't just ruin Meghan. It could destroy him too. Because people will ask, why didn't he leave sooner? Why did he protect her? Why did he stay silent? And that, perhaps, is the cruelest cut of all. Harry, victim and protector at the same time. But here's the part no one saw coming. The royal family. The palace may have been blindsided, but they have ears everywhere. Whispers from Montecito reached London faster than anyone expected. And when the news trickled back to William, Charles, and Camilla, the reaction was immediate. Anger, shock, and perhaps vindication. Because didn't they warn Harry? Didn't they tell him Meghan was trouble? Didn't they beg him to slow down before marrying her? And now, if the leaks are true, wasn't this the ultimate "we told you so"? The hospital records, sealed tight, may never officially surface. But the whispers are louder than ever. And those whispers raise the question no one dares speak aloud. Is this marriage not just broken, but dangerous? And here's where the cliffhanger takes us. Because if Meghan truly crossed that line, if Harry's injuries weren't just the result of an accident, then the story is no longer about one violent night. It's about a pattern, a history, and what comes next could tear not just their marriage apart, but the very empire they built together. But what exactly did Meghan do in the days after the hospital visit? How did she spin, strategize, and smile while the truth gnawed at the edges of her carefully crafted image? That's where we go next. And it will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about their story. What happens when denial becomes louder than truth? When silence from one side collides with rehearsed smiles from the other? We left off with Harry's hospital visit, his injuries whispered about in corners, records sealed, but details leaking like water through a cracked dam. Now the focus shifts to what happened after. How did Meghan respond? And why did Harry, of all people, remain silent? Meghan's reaction in the days after the alleged incident is one of the most telling contradictions of the entire saga. Instead of disappearing from the spotlight, she doubled down on appearances, smiling at charity events, walking hand in hand with Harry in staged outings, giving carefully calculated looks to photographers. To the public eye, nothing was wrong. In fact, she seemed more polished than ever. But insiders say it wasn't confidence, it was strategy. Ask yourself, why would someone go out of their way to look so perfect at a time when their private world was allegedly falling apart? Could it be to distract, to shift attention, to control the narrative before it spiraled out of her hands? Meghan knows the cameras are both a curse and a shield, and she wielded them like a weapon. Harry, however, told a different story. Not with words, because he said nothing, but with his silence. His eyes looked heavier, his posture more withdrawn. In photos, he smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. His body language screamed discomfort, but his mouth stayed shut. And isn't that silence itself suspicious? A man once so outspoken about mental health, about truth, about breaking free of control, suddenly, in this moment, retreats into silence? That silence speaks volumes. It suggests fear. It suggests loyalty stretched to breaking point. Or perhaps it suggests shame. Shame at being a victim when he's always seen himself as strong, as resilient, as unbreakable. What do you think? Was Harry protecting Meghan? Or was he protecting himself from the humiliation of admitting the truth? Meanwhile, Meghan allegedly launched into damage control. Her team, according to insiders, scrambled behind the scenes. Calls were made to PR experts. Strategies drawn up. Narrative angles debated. Should they blame the stress of media attacks? Should they frame Harry's injuries as unrelated? Or perhaps lean on the oldest, simplest excuse: he tripped? And here's the contradiction. Meghan, who has spent years telling the world her truth, claiming she was silenced by the palace, overlooked by the firm, was now allegedly silencing the one person whose truth could ruin her. If Tr. Behind the walls of Montecito, the atmosphere grew tense. Staff reportedly whispered about quitting. Some couldn't handle the guilt of covering up what they had seen. Others feared Meghan's wrath. Harry, sources say, spent more time secluded, avoiding interaction, avoiding questions. The house that was meant to be their sanctuary now felt like a prison. A prison built not of bars, but of lies. Publicly, Meghan played the role of supportive wife, smiling at Harry, holding his hand, looking into his eyes for the cameras. But behind the scenes, insiders claim it was different. Arguments continued. The tension only grew. And Harry, torn between love and survival, allegedly sank deeper into silence. And here's where it gets even darker. Reports suggest Meghan blamed Harry for the leaks. Imagine that. The man injured, humiliated, silenced, accused of being the source of whispers he never uttered. That kind of accusation isn't just unfair. It's cruel. It's manipulation. And it paints a picture of a marriage in which the victim is also the scapegoat. But Harry's silence created another problem: speculation. The world began to notice. Journalists picked up on inconsistencies. Photos of Harry with subtle bruises sparked online debates. Was it lighting? Was it stress? Or was it something more? Social media lit up with theories, each one more explosive than the last. And in the absence of Harry's voice, the world filled the silence with its own narrative. Here's the question for you. Do you think silence protects, or do you think silence condemns? Because in this case, Meghan's denial and Harry's refusal to speak created a paradox. Instead of killing the story, it fed it. Instead of protecting their image, it made people dig deeper. And then, the royal family entered the picture. Not publicly, of course, they never do. But whispers from palace aides suggest William was furious. Charles, worried. Camilla, appalled. And Kate? Insiders claim she was heartbroken. Because despite everything, despite the rift, she never wanted to see Harry in pain. Imagine the conversations behind palace doors. Did you hear what happened to Harry? Is it true? What do we do if this comes out? The Sussexes had always painted the royal family as the enemy. But now, in this twisted turn of fate, it was the royals who seemed concerned, and Meghan who seemed cold. Isn't that the ultimate irony? But Meghan wasn't about to let the royals seize the narrative. She allegedly began planning new projects, fresh appearances, anything to distract the public. Her strategy was simple: bury the whispers under a flood of content. Control the spotlight so the shadows stayed hidden. But shadows have a way of stretching, don't they? And the more she smiled, the more people wondered what she was hiding. Meanwhile, Harry's silence grew unbearable. Friends who once spoke to him regularly said he became distant, unreachable, locked away in a world only Meghan controlled. Some say he wanted to speak out, to tell his side, but fear held him back. Others believe he convinced himself that silence was the only way to survive. What do you think? Is silence noble, or is it dangerous? Because here's where the cliffhanger lands. Insiders claim that Harry's silence wasn't just personal. It was strategic. He was allegedly preparing something bigger, something that could flip the script entirely. And Meghan, sensing it, grew more desperate to control him. More appearances, more smiles, more denial. But how long can you bury a truth this heavy before it explodes? The cracks are there. The leaks are growing. The silence is deafening. And the world is watching. But what happens when the royal family decides enough is enough? What happens when whispers turn into confrontation, not behind closed doors, but on the global stage? That's where the story goes next. And it's a twist you won't believe. What happens when whispers reach Buckingham Palace? When the carefully constructed silence of Montecito collides with the centuries-old walls of royal power? We ended with a cliffhanger, the question of how the royal family would respond once the rumors of Harry's hospital visit, his injuries, and Meghan's alleged role began circulating. And this, my friends, is where the story takes on a whole new dimension. Because this isn't just Meghan versus Harry anymore. This is Meghan versus the monarchy. Let's start with William. Imagine him receiving the call. A brother he once stood shoulder to shoulder with, now estranged, now humiliated, now allegedly hurt by his own wife. William has always been protective of Harry, even when angry with him. Remember when they were children, walking behind Diana's coffin? That bond doesn't vanish overnight. And yet, when whispers reached him, insiders say William's fury was volcanic. Not only at Meghan, but at the entire situation Harry had allowed himself to be trapped in. But here's the contradiction. William couldn't say anything publicly, because the firm operates on silence, not confrontation. Still, in private, aides claim his words were blunt. He's not safe with her. Strong, cold, heartbreaking. Imagine saying that about your own brother's wife. Charles, meanwhile, reportedly reacted with horror. The king who fought his own battles with Diana, the man accused of neglect and cruelty in his own marriage, now faced the possibility that history had twisted itself into something darker. His son, the one he already struggled to reach, was now allegedly a victim of violence. Can you imagine the guilt? The realization that the son who fled the palace for freedom had found something far worse outside of it? And Camilla, her reaction, insiders suggest, was both shock and vindication. Shock because no matter how much she disliked Meghan, she never wished this. Vindication because hadn't she warned Charles? Hadn't she told the family that Meghan was trouble? That her temper was dangerous? The whispers of "we told you so" rang through royal hallways like a chilling echo. But what about Kate? The Princess of Wales, who once shared laughter with Meghan at Wimbledon, who tried to welcome her, who then became her target in Meghan's interviews. Insiders say Kate was devastated. Despite the hurt, despite the feud, despite the years of tension, she never wanted Harry in pain. And here lies the cruelest irony of all. Kate, the woman Meghan accused of making her cry, allegedly cried herself when she heard the whispers of Harry's injuries. Let's pause here. Do you see the contradiction? Meghan, who claimed the royals never protected her, now stood accused of harming the very man they all still loved. The royals, who were painted as villains in Harry and Meghan's story, suddenly looked like the only ones who cared about Harry's well-being. Isn't that a twist you never expected? But the palace couldn't go public. That's not their way. Instead, they moved quietly. Calls made. Advisors consulted. Lawyers briefed. Because if the leaks were true, if the hospital reports ever surfaced, the monarchy couldn't stay silent forever. They would have to act, not just to protect their image, but to protect Harry himself. And here's where it gets even darker. Some insiders suggest William considered confronting Harry directly. Imagine that phone call. "What happened to you? Tell me the truth." But Harry, loyal even in pain, allegedly denied it all. "I'm fine," he said. "Don't believe the press." That's the tragedy of it. The very family he left behind, now begging for answers. And Harry, still shielding Meghan even as his face bore the truth. Why do you think he did that? Was it love? Fear? Shame? Or the crushing weight of knowing that admitting the truth would mean admitting his entire escape, his entire sacrifice, had been for nothing? Meanwhile, the palace PR machine began preparing for two possible scenarios. Scenario 1. Silence continues, leaks fade, and the story dies. Scenario 2. The truth explodes, and they must pivot to protect Harry, perhaps even publicly. And here's the shocking part. Some aides allegedly discussed whether Harry should be urged to separate from Meghan if things escalated. That's right, divorce, whispered in the same corridors that once planned royal weddings. Now think about this. What would a royal divorce mean? For Harry? For Meghan? For the monarchy itself? It would be nuclear. Because unlike Charles and Diana, this marriage wasn't just royal. It was Hollywood. It was Netflix. It was Spotify. It was Oprah. It was global. And the fallout wouldn't just be scandal. It would be war. And Meghan knew it. That's why, according to insiders, she worked overtime to project control. More smiles. More appearances. More interviews subtly reminding the world of her hardships. Painting herself as misunderstood, silenced, the eternal victim. But this time, the cracks showed. The public wasn't buying it as easily. Because the rumors of Harry's hospital visit refused to die. Here's where the contradiction cuts deepest. Meghan has always claimed her voice was taken from her. But now, in this moment, it was Harry's voice that was truly gone. Silenced not by the monarchy, but by his own marriage. Do you see the tragic irony in that? And the royals? They were torn. To act or not to act. To protect or to wait. But one thing became clear. They couldn't ignore it forever. Because if Harry's silence continued, and if Meghan's denial grew louder, eventually, someone else would speak. A nurse, a bodyguard, a staff member. And when that happened, the palace would no longer be able to claim ignorance. So ask yourself, what happens when the truth collides with centuries of tradition? What happens when the palace, built on silence, is forced to confront a scandal too big to bury? Because that's where this story is heading. The confrontation isn't just behind closed doors anymore. It's coming. And when it arrives, it won't just shake the Sussexes. It will shake the monarchy itself. But what happens when the press gets wind of the missing piece? The hidden witness who saw and heard everything that night? What happens when silence isn't enough? When the whispers of insiders and the leaks from medical staff collide with the eyes of someone who was actually there? That's where this story takes its sharpest, most dangerous turn. The hidden witness. Because while Meghan and Harry's team scrambled to bury the truth, one person allegedly saw and heard enough that night to unravel everything. Every scandal has a witness. Sometimes it's a bystander. Sometimes it's a staffer who can't live with the guilt. Sometimes it's the one person nobody expected to break ranks. And in this case, the whispers point to someone inside the Montecito estate. A member of staff. A bodyguard. Perhaps even a nanny. Someone who wasn't supposed to see, but did. Someone who wasn't supposed to hear, but did. And once that truth took root, silence was no longer an option. Let's rewind to the night itself. Staff heard the raised voices. They heard the crash of glass. They heard the thud, Harry hitting the floor. Some rushed in moments later, trying to intervene, trying to help. And here's where it gets damning. At least one of them, insiders claim, saw Meghan lash out. Saw the strike. Saw Harry fall. This wasn't speculation. This wasn't whispers. This was eyes on evidence. Now think about that. Imagine you're a staff member, sworn to secrecy, bound by contract, working in one of the most high-profile households in the world. You see something you were never supposed to see. You watch the prince collapse, injured, and the woman who caused it, allegedly, turns to you, sharp, commanding, demanding silence. What do? Do you obey? Do you protect your job? Or do you risk everything and tell the truth? The witness allegedly chose a dangerous middle ground. They stayed silent outwardly, but inside, the truth ate at them. It gnawed, heavy, unbearable, and eventually, it slipped. Quietly at first. A comment to a colleague. A late-night message to a journalist friend. A confession to someone they trusted. And like all confessions, once spoken, it couldn't be unsaid. Ask yourself, what makes someone break silence? Is it guilt, fear, or the knowledge that the world deserves to know? The contradictions only grew sharper once the witness began to share. Meghan's denial versus the witness's account. Harry's silence versus the staffer's whispers. The public smiles versus the private chaos. And slowly, the truth began to take shape in the shadows. But here's the twist that makes this story explosive. The witness wasn't just any staffer. They were close. Trusted. Someone who had been in the Sussex household long enough to know its rhythms, its secrets, its masks. Their testimony didn't just describe one night. It hinted at a pattern. Alleged outbursts. Shouting matches. Items thrown. Staff reduced to tears. And then, the night when it escalated further than ever before. Imagine the weight of that. It's not just one accusation. It's a chain of them. A narrative of rage. A story that, if true, could dismantle Meghan's entire public persona. Because it's no longer did it happen once. The real question becomes, how many times did this happen before? And this is where the press smelled blood. Reporters began circling, desperate to find the hidden witness. Tabloids published hints, an insider claims, a close aide reveals. Headlines grew bolder. Talk shows speculated. And Meghan's team scrambled harder than ever. But no matter how many smiles she put on, no matter how many hand-holding appearances she staged with Harry, the contradictions were glaring. The witness said one thing. Meghan projected another. And the public began to wonder, who do we believe? But let's not forget Harry. the man at the center of this storm. His silence became heavier with every passing day. Every headline about the witness added to the pressure. Why wasn't he defending Meghan? Why wasn't he defending himself? That silence, that refusal to break, became its own kind of confession. Because sometimes, not speaking says more than words ever could. Here's a detail whispered by insiders that chills to the bone. The witness allegedly described Meghan's reaction in the immediate aftermath. Not panic, not sorrow, not regret, but cold calculation. Get him up. Don't make this worse. No one needs to know. Those words, if true, reveal more than just temper. They reveal intent to control, to bury, to erase. And isn't that the cruelest twist of all? The woman who accused the palace of silencing her, allegedly silencing her own husband's pain. Do you see the irony? Meghan claimed to be Diana 2.0, the silenced, misunderstood outsider crushed by the monarchy. But if the witness is right, she became the silencer, turning Harry into the one who couldn't speak. Isn't that the most tragic contradiction of all? The witness's account grew legs. Journalists chased it. Editors debated whether to publish. Lawyers threatened lawsuits. And still, the whispers spread. Because the truth, once glimpsed, cannot be unseen. And here's where the cliffhanger sharpens. If the hidden witness ever goes public, if their face, their name, their story breaks the veil, what happens then? Does Meghan's empire collapse overnight? Does Harry finally find his voice? Or does he remain trapped in silence, forced to choose between loyalty and survival? Because this isn't just about one fight. It's about the fight for truth. And the hidden witness might just be the one to tip the scales. But what exactly did that witness reveal about Meghan's alleged history of rage? The outbursts, the threats, the pattern that paints a much darker picture than anyone imagined. That's where we go next. And it's the revelation that could shake their empire to its very core. What if this wasn't the first time? What if the violent night that left Harry allegedly injured wasn't an isolated explosion, but the climax of a storm that had been building for years? That's the chilling suggestion that emerges when we follow the trail of Meghan's alleged history of rage, a trail long ignored, dismissed, or explained away as stress and misunderstanding. But when you line up the stories, when you connect the dots, the picture becomes impossible to ignore. We left off with the hidden witness, a person who not only saw what happened that night, but hinted at something far more damaging, a pattern. Because patterns matter. They tell us whether an event was an accident or the inevitable result of behavior repeated over and over. And Meghan's pattern, if insiders are to be believed, is one of volatility. Let's rewind to her days in the palace. Even then, the whispers existed. Staff quietly complained of her temper. Some described her as demanding, others as bullying. Words like dictatorial and impossible were murmured behind closed doors. At first, defenders rushed to explain it away. She was under pressure. She was adapting to a new world. She was misunderstood. But was it really just pressure, or was it a glimpse of something deeper? Think about the bullying dossier. Remember the reports that surfaced in 2021? Palace aides accused Meghan of reducing staff to tears, of driving people out of their jobs. One aide allegedly said, "I can't stop shaking." Another claimed Meghan's wrath left them feeling traumatized. At the time, Meghan denied it all, dismissing it as a smear campaign. But now, with Harry's alleged hospital incident, those old claims take on a haunting new weight. Were those staffers telling the truth all along? Ask yourself this. How many times can the same story surface before it stops being coincidence? The witness who came forward after Harry's hospital night didn't just describe one outburst. They hinted that Meghan's temper had always been like walking on a minefield. One moment calm, the next moment volcanic. A glass slammed on a counter. A door slammed hard enough to shake the walls. Shouted words that cut like knives. And staff, always the collateral damage, left picking up the pieces. But what about Harry? Was he spared the storm? Insiders suggest no. They say Meghan's temper didn't stop at staff. Harry himself was often the target. Shouted at, belittled, made to feel small. "You're nothing without me," she allegedly told him during one fight. "You'd still be in William's shadow if it weren't for me." Those aren't just harsh words. Those are daggers aimed at Harry's deepest wounds, his fear of being irrelevant, his lifelong struggle with the label of spare. Now imagine hearing that not once, but over and over. How long before the words break you down? How long before you believe them? Isn't that, in itself, a kind of violence? Here's the contradiction that makes this so hard to reconcile. Meghan built her public brand on kindness, compassion, and empowerment. She gave speeches about women's rights, mental health, and breaking cycles of abuse. She positioned herself as a survivor, a voice for the silenced. And yet, if these accounts are true, behind closed doors, she wasn't breaking the cycle. She was continuing it. The woman who claimed to be silenced may have been the one silencing others. And it wasn't just palace staff. Hollywood insiders whisper similar stories from her Suits days. A reputation for being difficult, demanding, quick to anger. On set, people brushed it off as ambition. After all, Hollywood thrives on strong personalities. But when you place those stories next to Palisades' complaints, and now next to Harry's alleged injuries, the pattern becomes harder to ignore. Here's a detail from one insider that stops you cold. They claimed Meghan once threw a teacup against a wall during a heated argument in Kensington Palace. Staff heard the shatter. At